Welcome to the Practice Management Study Club. Today's topic is 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team. It is being presented by Sandy Balarjan, and we will begin the webinar shortly. My name is Jessica Respondek, and I am here with DSG Education. I almost said that I am DSG Education. So thank you for joining with us this evening. I'm going to start with some housekeeping tips and tricks, but it's okay if you're just getting settled and ready and you need to run, grab something, and come right back. We will be posting up the housekeeping tips and tricks in the chat box for your reference later. So at the start, little disclosure, tonight's webinar is being recorded for educational content purposes. The question and answers button, it's located in the middle of the bottom of your screen to the right. Please use the Q&A button for any thoughts and curiosities as the presentation moves along. We'll be more than happy to address all entries at the end of the presentation. Chat function, it's located in the middle of the bottom of your screen to the left. Feel free to use the chat box for any technical questions or concerns, or merely to say hello and engage with other participants. Raise your hand, it's located in the middle of the bottom of your screen. Feel free to raise your hand and you may ask your questions live at the end of the presentation. Polling questions, they're going to pop up toward the end of the presentation, and we would enjoy your feedback through participation. CE certificates. They're going to be issued post-webinar to the email address used to register for today's session. Please feel free to email education@dentalservices.net if you don't receive yours after 2 business days. And please include your name, course date, and course title to help us search for your record. Please note, if you logged in using someone else's registration link, we encourage you to log off, register, and log back in with your unique link. Otherwise, we won't know that you attended the event, and the system will not be able to issue you a certificate. Registration links may be found at www.dentalservices.net/edu. Also, if you've decided to phone in this evening without logging into your desktop or phone app application, please send an email to education@dentalservices.net with your name and phone number, as the system does not record phone numbers in the certificate issuance verification process. Say that 3 times fast. Post-webinar survey. A survey is going to pop up at the close of the webinar in your web browser, and a link will be sent in a follow-up email thanking you for attending. We ask for your completion with valuable feedback and any suggestions on what you would like to learn about in the future. And course handouts were sent to you prior to the start, and also we'll send them post-session to the email address used to register for today's presentation. And one last item before we begin, please know we recognize the abundance of learning options available, and we truly appreciate you for affording DSG Education your time, attention, and participation. And with that, it is my pleasure to recognize both Veronica Brown, Director of Practice Solutions, and Joanne Friedman, Client Experience Manager. Both these ladies handle all of Canada. Take it away, ladies.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. It is my honor to introduce Sandy Balarjan. Sandy is a leading authority on how to increase the effectiveness of dental business systems. Sandy is the author of 2 textbooks, The Dental Office Administration and The Canadian Dentist Office Administrator. She wrote the first practice management certificate program for the University of Toronto. She specializes in dental business planning, staff development, consulting, and continuing education seminars. Please go ahead, Sandy.
Thanks so much, Veronica. And thank you for allowing me the privilege of being with you tonight. I'd also like to say a special thank you to our Canadian friends who have joined this evening, because it's a privilege to be able to present to you on the final hours of our long weekend. So I really appreciate that a lot. So tonight we're going to be talking about the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. Something that I hear often from my clients is that they will tell me that their dental team is much like their family. And I can say from all families and all dental teams that this has been a very stressful year for everyone, and that's probably a really gross understatement. But the fact is that when dental teams are put under stressful situations, it's how they recover and how they come back together again that is really the most important, and it really shows the cohesiveness of the team. So we're going to be showing you a few videos as well during this process. Now the videos tonight will be 2 to 3 minutes a piece. They are necessary to get the full context of what we're talking about tonight. So I hope you'll bear with the videos, and I'm sure that you'll find that Patrick Liccioni is an excellent speaker. Now this system is based on the best-selling book, the New York Times best-selling book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And from this is a facilitation system that has been put together based on DISC profiling as well, so the personality styles. And we'll be talking about this as we go through the evening. So why are we here? Because cohesive teams make better and faster decisions. They also tap into the skills and opinions of all members, not just 1 or 2 members, but all members of the dental team, just like a family. Avoid wasting time on energy on politics, confusion, and destructive conflict, because that's negative energy. But that negative energy can actually be positive energy when we turn that into more positive, constructive criticism. And they create a competitive advantage. And in dentistry now, it is a very competitive world out there. And essentially, they're more fun to be on. And when you have a team that's having fun and enjoying themselves and trust each other and get along very well, then you'll have a very productive team. So the goals for this evening is to learn about the 5 behaviors of cohesive team and to recognize your own communication style and how that influences your behavior and the behavior of others. As a team, to explore the strengths and challenges and create an action plan as well. So we're going to begin with learning about the 5 behaviors of cohesive team model, and this will be Patrick Liccioni who will be introducing this. And it takes a little moment for the copyright information to come up.
This is my team, my dysfunctional team. It may look pretty normal on the surface, but underneath, there are 5 things going on that need serious attention. Let's take a look. She can't ask for help. He doesn't want to risk starting an argument. He's only pretending that he's on board. That's me. I don't think it's my job to make sure he does his job. And he only cares about his own goals. So that's my team. Maybe your team has its own challenges. In his New York Times best-selling book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Patrick Liccioni identifies 5 core dysfunctions that most teams face. The first dysfunction is an absence of trust among team members. This stems from their unwillingness to be vulnerable within the group. Vulnerability is about being able to say and genuinely mean things like, I screwed up, I need help, and I'm sorry. Team members who are not genuinely open with one another about their mistakes and weaknesses make it impossible to build a foundation for trust. This failure to build trust is damaging because it sets the tone for the second dysfunction, fear of conflict. Teams that lack trust are incapable of engaging in unfiltered and passionate debate of ideas. Instead, they resort to veiled discussions and guarded comments. A lack of healthy conflict ensures the third dysfunction, lack of commitment. Without airing their opinions in passionate and open debate, team members rarely, if ever, buy in and commit to decisions, though they may feign agreement during meetings. Teams that fail to get this commitment develop the fourth dysfunction, avoidance of accountability. Without committing to a clear plan of action, even the most focused and driven people often hesitate to call their peers on actions and behaviors that seem counterproductive to the good of the team. And this leads to the fifth dysfunction, inattention to results. Inattention to results occurs when team members put their individual needs, such as ego, career development, or recognition, above the collective goals of the team. Another way to understand this model is to take the opposite approach, a positive one, and imagine how members of truly cohesive teams behave. First, they trust each other. They engage in productive conflict around ideas. They commit to decisions and plans of action. They hold one another accountable for delivering against those plans. And they focus on the achievement of collective results. And that's it. These are the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. Each one is a deliberate choice made by the team. They do require discipline and persistence, but the payoff can be big. And there's a nice bonus. Not only will the group be stronger and more productive, but high-functioning teams are a lot more fun to work on.
So to begin with, there was a survey done of 800 participants, and these are some of the questions that were asked. When coworkers admit their mistakes, does it make you trust them more? And from that survey, 84% answered yes. Do you think that your workplace would be more productive if people were more frank with their opinions? 71% said yes. Do you sometimes feel that team projects suffer because people aren't committed enough? 86% said yes. Would your work team be more effective if people were better at holding one another accountable? And 89% said yes. In your work experience, have you seen projects suffer because people put their own needs ahead of their team's needs? And 87% answered yes. So the foundation of the 5 behaviors is building trust. So let's talk for a quick moment about what trust is. So the first most important behavior is trust. Just like in a family, it's the most important part. You trust your family, and it's very important to trust your team members as well. Confidence among team members that their peers' intentions are good and that there's no reason to be protective or careful around the group. That's really important. In essence, team members must get comfortable in being vulnerable with one another. So being able to admit mistakes or to accept other people's faults as well as your own faults. So that's a key factor in this. I'm going to let Patrick Lucioni go through the definition of trust.
So let's go ahead and get started and talk about the first behavior that we have to master to make our teams great. And that behavior is trust. Now that sounds obvious, doesn't it? You're thinking, no duh. Is this really anything new? Well, the thing about trust that's important is most of us think about trust as what I call predictive trust. That we have to be able to predict one another's behaviors. Well, any group of people, any 2 people that have known each other for a long period of time will have predictive trust with one another. They'll be able to predict one another's behaviors. If I say something, you know that this is what I'm probably going to do. Or if you tell me that you're going to do something, I know what's actually going to happen. I can predict your behavior. That's not really trust when it comes to a team. The kind of trust that I'm talking about on a team is what I call vulnerability-based trust. Vulnerability-based trust is the kind of trust that comes about when human beings on a team can and will say things to one another like, I don't know the answer, I need help, I think I made a mistake, or even, I'm sorry, I think I did something that was wrong. When they can be completely vulnerable about who they are, mistakes and warts and all, it creates a dynamic on a team that is just invaluable. And we all know how powerful this can be if we think about teams we've been on that didn't have vulnerability-based trust. And we've all experienced that in our careers. Once I worked with a team that was struggling, and they asked me to do a 2-day offsite for the team. But before I did that, they said, come observe our staff meeting so you can see kind of how we interact with one another. And so I went to their staff meeting. I noticed something very interesting, kind of funky, if you will. There was this one person on the team that whenever she spoke at the meeting, every time she said anything, the room would go silent. There'd be this awkward pause until someone changed the subject and they moved on to something else. Every time she spoke. So they'd be talking about competitive analysis and what they needed to do to fight off a threat from her competitor. And she would say, well, this is what I think we should do. And people would go silent. And somebody would change the subject. They'd be talking about something else, strategy or something. And she'd say, well, this is what we did at my last company and this is what I think we should do. Silence. It was the weirdest thing. So after the meeting, I went to one of the people on the team and I said, what is going on? Why does nobody ever say anything after she talks? And they said, because we've learned that whenever we disagree with her or have a different idea than hers, she always defends herself. She never acknowledges that we might be right. And we finally decided, why bother? So we thought that was interesting. So a little while later, we did our 2-day offsite with this team, and we went off, and during the first day of the 2-day offsite, we talked about trust and vulnerability and the need to open up and be open with your teammates. And we also talked about strategy and tactics and everything else the team was doing. And that night, we went to dinner. Before the second day, we went to dinner at an Italian restaurant where we had wine with dinner, which is the great elixir of truth on many teams, as you know. And this woman, after having a few too many glasses of wine, stood up at the end of dinner and raised her glass and said, kind of like a toast, said, hey, you guys, we've been talking about trust today, and I just want you to know I've been married for 10 years now, and I've just barely learned to trust my husband this year, so I'm not going to be trusting you guys anytime soon, if ever. Cheers. And we were like, cheers, all right, you know. And we thought, okay. I went outside with the team leader, and we said, okay, this is the problem. This poor woman has some deep trust issue that probably dates back to her childhood. So we just had to work and try to get her to open up. Well, eventually, this woman left the organization. And do you know that the very next meeting they had there, without her, it was a completely different team. You would have thought they had swapped out every member of the team for a new one because it was completely different, the dynamic. And the moral of this story is this: if just one member of a team cannot be vulnerable, it spreads like a disease to the whole team. Just one member. So we have to ask ourselves, and everybody's going to come to vulnerability different ways. Depending on your disc type, it's going to look different. But you got to know that everyone is committed to getting there, and that will make the difference on your team in building trust.
So with building trust, team members who lack trust often exhibit the following behaviors. So they may conceal their weaknesses and their mistakes. They hesitate to ask for help and to provide constructive feedback to others. They also don't offer help to people outside of their own areas of responsibility. And they fail to recognize and tap into another's skills. And also they have a tendency to hold grudges. So that's what happens when they don't have trust on a team. And they also find reasons to avoid spending time together. So that's important to realize that great teams will trust one another on an emotional and fundamental level. They also are vulnerable with each other about their weaknesses and their mistakes and fears, because let's face it, nobody's perfect. So it's important to try not to be perfect on a job. And I always tell new employees this, especially, to ask a lot of questions and don't worry about making mistakes, because mistakes are great learning experiences. They also can be completely open with one another without filters, because it's a non-threatening environment. When you trust one another, it's an open and non-threatening environment. So I'm going to show you 2 examples here. One is an example of a team that is interacting who don't have trust, and then we're going to see what the difference is when they are interacting with trust.
So I got a call from Harris this morning. Said they were taking their business to another company. And the only reason I could get out of them was that they were expecting a higher level of service from us. So does anyone have any idea what happened? Nobody knows anything?
There was a delay in one of their shipments, a glitch in the software, one time, maybe a couple times.
I mean, this is your account. I'm assuming they said something to you?
Look, I didn't know. It's not like we have time to have a heart-to-heart with every single client every single day.
Didn't anybody complain or notice even?
Nobody from Harris called until the order was 2 weeks late.
So they didn't notice their shipment was late for 2 weeks, and they canceled their account the first time they called?
No. It was after the 7th. They canceled after the 7th call.
They called, but they didn't have their order number, they didn't have a SKU. They said they'd call back, but they were returning calls at like 10 at night.
See, I didn't know anything about that.
We always put that stuff in the logs.
I don't have time to check the logs.
So do you need someone to help with your caseload?
No. I mean, if they're a mind reader, we can't be expected to know every single time a client gets worked up. Unless they're going to tell us, it doesn't matter how many people are working for us, right?
So in that situation, no one is accepting accountability or responsibility for what happened with the customer. So, and that's because they don't trust each other. So team members need to be comfortable and need to be unafraid to honestly say things like, I was wrong, I made a mistake, or I need help. That gentleman that was asked about, it was his account. He clearly, it was his responsibility to follow up with the customer, but he was overwhelmed with too much work and was afraid to mention it, even though he was offered that help from the leader. And also they're afraid to say, I'm sorry. You know, mistakes happen, things happen in offices. So for a team to establish real trust, team members, including the leader, especially the leader, must be willing to take risks without guarantee of success. So, but in order to do that, you need to have trust. So now we're going to see the same team that have worked out their trust issues, and now they're dealing with the same problem, and see what the difference.
So I got a call from Harris this morning, said they're taking their business to another company. And the only reason I could get out of them was that they expected a higher level of service from us. So does anybody have any idea what happened?
Yeah, they had 2 pretty big shipments that were delayed quite a bit. We went back and forth with them, but to be honest, it was a mess. I should have been more on top of it.
Well, I mean, this is your account. What'd they say when you asked them about it?
I have to admit, I didn't know this was going on. We're just swamped.
And I should have kept you in the loop. I'm sorry.
Was there anything that I can be doing so that I can keep on top of these things?
Well, we always keep a record of these things in the logs.
You know what? I knew that. I should be checking those.
So do you need someone to help with your caseload?
Maybe. Something's got to change. There's got to be a way to proactively track these things as they happen. Is there any way that I can pull you into that conversation to get your perspective on it?
Absolutely.
So the team that was based on trust, there wasn't any defensive posturing. Everyone was cooperating and openly admitting in a non-threatening environment that things happen. And so let's solve the problem, and let's not blame each other or finger point. So how do you develop this in a dental team? You can start by doing a personal histories exercise, and you can do this. It's a fun little exercise that you can do during a staff meeting, but especially in teams after going through the year of COVID, the year and a half of COVID, as well as all of the additional protocols that are in place. You know, there's a lot of tension in the office. Sometimes there are a lot of people that are changing offices. You know, there's a lot of staff that are going back and forth, and staff turnover. So how do you get to develop this kind of trust if your staff is turning over or you've got new team members? So this personal histories exercise is a fun little exercise that helps you to get to know one another on a different level. And it's really important to get to know people on a different level. I just share one little experience that I had. We had a problem with the receptionist that we hired at one of the first office actually that I worked in. And the receptionist eventually left the office, or was asked to leave the office by the doctor. But at that time we had a really cohesive team, and that we were really all in sync with one another. We helped each other, and we were just really in tune with one another. And we would socialize after work and from time to time, and so that was really important. But when that one person came in, she caused so much tension and stress in the office that we started drifting apart from one another. And so it was up to all of us to come back. And we did that by attending a seminar in New Orleans, which was a lot of fun. And but sharing a hotel room together and dining together and just being with each other for 24 hours a day, just for a few days, made a huge difference with us, because we got to know each other on a different level. So you can do this during a staff meeting, and here's a simple way of doing it. Have a little exercise saying, you know, where did you grow up? How many siblings did you have? Where did you fall in the sibling order? You know, were you the oldest or the youngest or the middle child? And what was an important or unique challenge of your childhood, of just growing up and being a kid? So answer those questions, and then have each person share their personal history with everyone. And keep in mind, it's not a perfect world. You will get some pushback from this from time to time from some of the team members, But once they see other people engaging and getting involved in this, they might be more willing to open up. Then once you do that, after everybody has shared their story, ask the question, what did you learn about your colleagues that you didn't know before? And how do you think that what you've learned in this activity will impact the level of trust on the team? So it just helps to get to know people on a different level. And it also helps to sometimes uncover some of the reasons that people behave the way they do. So it's a fun little exercise, and it will help you to build the trust in your dental teams. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the DISC model. So the DISC is the personality profiling, or in other words, your communication style. I teach this in the treatment coordinating program, and I think it's very important when you're doing case presentations to understand the communication style of your patient and to know your own communication style and how you can best relate to someone of a different communication style. So the DISC stands for D, which is a dominant style, and dominant communication style, they're usually very direct. Those are very results-oriented people. They are usually very strong-willed, sometimes can come across as a little bit blunt, but they like to get results. They're very driven. Somebody who is an I is an influence style, and that is somebody who's very outgoing. They're enthusiastic, they're optimistic, usually a little bit talkative and lively. I call the I people the cheerleaders of the practice. I usually, excuse me, try to get someone who is an I style working at the front desk, because you really want that enthusiasm and that optimistic attitude at the front desk. S is for steadiness. So that is, steadiness is someone who's very even-tempered, usually very accommodating. They're very patient, humble. They try to not upset the water. You know, they try to keep everybody calm, and so it's always good to have an S style on your office complement of staff. And C is for conscientious. Now, conscientious are very analytical. So they're also can be very reserved. They're very systematic. They like things in order, in good order. And the idea behind this is that we're actually a combination of all of these communication styles at one point or another, but we have one dominant style that we are most comfortable with. So when we are that communication style, it's very important to try to adapt to other people's styles, because you get much better results, especially when it comes to case presentation, when you understand it and communicate well on that level with your patients. So now we're going to see another little thing on...
What if people had their needs written all over them? If you knew that this person wanted more independence, and that person wanted a bit more reassurance, would it change the way you work together? Would it make your job easier? Yeah, it probably would. But that's not the real world. Or is it? Maybe if you had the right decoder, everyone's needs would be a lot more obvious. It would be clear how to work more effectively together, to be more productive, more satisfied. All you would need is a tool to help you understand where people are coming from. This is DISC, your decoder. It gives you a way to quickly understand the needs and priorities of the people around you. It describes 4 basic styles: D, I, S, and C. Here's how it works. First, everyone has a dot. That dot tells you your DISC style. For instance, if you have a D, or dominant style, you probably drive toward results, insist on immediate action, and challenge the status quo. Most likely, other people with the D style share your priorities, even though you might butt heads from time to time. Different styles may find this same D approach to be blunt, intimidating, or insensitive. If you have an I, or influence style, you probably approach work with enthusiasm, enjoy collaboration, and take quick action. Others with the I style probably find your energy exciting, even if the two of you are a little too optimistic at times. Different styles may find this sort of liveliness and fast pace to be sloppy or reckless. Or you may have an S or steadiness style, which means you like to support people, maintain stability, and enjoy collaboration. People with the S style will probably appreciate your patient and easygoing nature, even if that means there's little sense of urgency. Different styles might see you as overly accommodating or indecisive. And finally, if you have a C or conscientiousness style, you probably focus on accuracy, use your logic to challenge ideas, and seek stability to ensure consistent outcomes. Others with the C style will like that you prioritize getting things right, even if the two of you can get bogged down in analysis. But for people with different styles, this cautious pace may feel dry, sapping their natural energy. The point is, even though you need to recognize your own DISC style, you also need to know where the people you work with are coming from. Whether you're simply connecting with others, solving problems, or working through conflict, you'll have to stretch from time to time. And using DISC as a guide, you'll have a better sense of when and why that sort of adapting is so crucial to not only your success, but the success of everyone in your workplace.
I just want to mention one thing. When I first went for DISC training in Minneapolis, one of the exercises that we had to do was when we determined what our dominant style was, each of us had to go into a group, and we had a large Post-it notes on the wall, and we had to describe a day in the life of a D style or an I style or an S style, etc. And at the end of that, it was quite obvious just by looking at all of the posters on the board what the communication styles were with each group. In the Ds, for example, they had in block letters 1 or 2 words for each line on their pad. With the I styles, the I, remember, they're the cheerleaders. They were writing in circles. They had drew flowers and butterflies, and they were very, very creative. And in the S style, I was in the S group. We had a sailboat with very calm water because we like to keep things calm and we like to collaborate with people, but we don't like to ruffle feathers. And then the C style had full sentences, very tiny writing with great punctuation, and it was just because they're very detail oriented. So all of the styles of communication are great, and they're all purposeful. And it's just important to understand everyone's particular style, and then to be able to, when you understand it, then you're able to adapt to it, and communication flows much, much easier. So the next skill in the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team is conflict. Now, nobody likes conflict, especially me, because I'm an S style. So I try to avoid conflict. And actually, when I'm interviewing a staff member, one of the questions I ask them, so I can determine there are 2 questions that I ask. So I can determine what their communication style is, plus, well, that's basically it. Their communication style is one, how do you handle conflict? And the other is, how would your coworkers describe you? So I can usually get a lot of information from those 2 questions when I'm doing an interview with an employee. So do you avoid conflict in your office? Conflict can be negative if it is in fact negative or destructive conflict. But constructive conflict is extremely important to have. Otherwise, you don't get new ideas in your office. So when there's trust, team members are able to engage in unfiltered and constructive debate. Healthy conflict focuses on concepts and ideas to produce the best possible solution. And that's a key word there is ideas. You don't get ideas if people don't trust that their idea is going to be accepted. And I always say when I'm dealing with the team, if they're thinking of marketing ideas, it doesn't matter how wild and crazy you might think those ideas are, bring them forward. You're in a safe environment, nobody's going to criticize you. And we get a lot of really interesting and valuable information in that type of scenario. So, quick quiz. The most successful teams have very little conflict. The answer is false. So normally I'd be asking you this in a group and you'd be responding to me, so I'm going to respond on your behalf. The best teams are made up of people who are comfortable passionately arguing for their ideas, and the answer is true. That's true. You get more ideas, and especially when people are passionate about it, it means that they're emotional about it, and that means that they're engaged and they care about the outcome. No matter what the cultural background and family norms, people generally feel the same way about conflict. They prefer to avoid it. That is false. Not all people like conflicts, like myself, but people with a D style, for example, they really engage in conflict, and they like conflict because remember, they're driven and they're results oriented, and they like that debate. Not that they're being mean or anything, that they just like the debate. Understanding team members' differing experiences with and feelings about conflict helps the team engage in unfiltered and productive debates. And the answer is true. When there's trust on the team and they're able to engage in debates, and it's a non-threatening environment, then you get a lot more creative ideas, and it really is helpful. So now we'll go back to Patrick, and he will give you the definition of.
You see, when we build trust on a team, it allows us to embrace the next thing that we have to do. And that is, we have to really understand and benefit from conflict. Conflict is a second discipline or behavior that we have to embrace. Conflict on a team is a good thing. Okay? Now, it looks different from culture to culture and company to company and family to family and disc profile to disc profile, and that's okay. The key is this: we're not talking about negative interpersonal conflict, mean-spirited. We're talking about productive ideological conflict, conflict around issues. That's a good thing on a team. What matters is this: that you know that nobody is holding back their opinions, that people are not afraid to speak up. They're not calculating the cost, weighing the political ramifications. They are, if something is worth disagreeing about, they will disagree, and they will tell one another. That's what we're looking for, that kind of conflict. Now, I said it's not supposed to be personal, and it's not supposed to be negative, but it's going to be uncomfortable. That's why I call it conflict. Some people say, well, can't you just call it discussion? The truth of the matter is, when human beings disagree, it's a little uncomfortable, and we have to embrace that, which is why we talk about trust first. Because if we trust one another, and we have to start there, and we have true vulnerability-based trust, then there's no fear. Because I know that if I disagree with you, you know that I'm not trying to hurt you. I'll admit if you convince me otherwise, so I can engage in this conflict without fear. But if there's no trust, if there's no vulnerability-based trust, then conflict becomes manipulation and politics. With trust, conflict is nothing but the pursuit of truth or the best possible answer. What a great thing that is. And that's why we need to embrace conflict on our teams. I once worked with a team that struggled with conflict, and I never quite understood why. And they had made some mistakes in the decisions they had made, and they couldn't figure out why. So I went to one of their staff meetings, and I saw something interesting happen. The team leader was sitting there, and most of their meetings were boring. And by the way, a boring meeting is a good sign of a team that doesn't engage in enough conflict. Because conflict is inherently interesting. And when we go to our team meetings, we should be disagreeing with one another, but because we trust each other, it's just productive. Well, this team had very boring meetings. So I was observing their meeting, and they finally started to get into issues. And they were debating things and getting uncomfortable with one another, and people were really challenging one another. It was the best meeting they'd ever had. And then the leader did something very telling. He pushed himself away from the table, stood up and said, "I can't deal with this." And he walked out of the room. And suddenly I realized this is why they have bad meetings, make bad decisions, and don't have good conflict. Because the leader was incapable of sitting there with them and encountering that. And we as team members and team leaders have to realize when we have conflict at our meetings, that's a good thing. As a consultant, and even as a team member, it's really important when team members start to engage in conflict and you can tell they're a little uncomfortable, that somebody interrupts them and says, "This is great. This debate that you guys are having, this is exactly what we need." Because people need to be reminded in real time that it's serving the team to engage in conflict, and that they're not violating anything, they're actually promoting goodness on the team.
So growth causes some level of discomfort. And I was thinking about my two grandchildren. You know, they are, one's age 10 and the other is 7, and they have growing pains. And just like children, growth is uncomfortable, and we have growing pains as dental teams. So it's very important to understand that sometimes when you're out of your comfort zone, and that's a good thing. It means that you're growing and that you're engaging in something new. So that's really important. Remember that trust is the prerequisite for mastering conflict, because if you don't have trust, then you can't have constructive conflict, and that's really the key here. Only team members who trust one another are going to feel comfortable enough to engage in debate around ideas, issues, and decisions. It doesn't mean that they'll never argue. You know, it's normal to argue one time, but that can be considered constructive debate. It's just that the arguments don't become destructive. And that's the key thing to this. Team members are more willing to listen to one another's ideas and possibly even reconsider their point of view once they hear the other person's side. So teams that fear conflict have boring meetings. And I know I've attended many boring meetings, and a lot of times their meetings issues are rehashed over and over again because an action plan hasn't been achieved from that, and somebody hasn't been held accountable for achieving that action. So that's a key way of making meetings a lot less boring. Create environments where back-channel politics and personal attacks thrive. Ignore controversial or difficult topics that are critical to team success. They fail to tap into all the opinions and perspectives of the team members. At Docs, I have a different type of meeting format where I call it a right to share meeting. And it's important that everyone engages in this and nobody is left out. And the important thing too is that every issue and action is discussed, and then an action plan is created, and a time-bound action plan is created at the end of the session. And at the next session, at the next team meeting, we discuss that action plan and what's been achieved and what hasn't been. So it's important to be able to do that in a trusting, non-threatening environment. Teams that fear conflict will also waste time and energy posturing and politics as well. But great teams are not afraid to engage in passionate dialogue. And remember, passion means that they care about the subject that you're debating. Do not hesitate to disagree with or challenge and question one another to find the best answers, because that's really what you want to achieve. Now, Patrick's going to talk a little bit about the conflict continuum, and he explains it better than I do. So I'm just going to let him.
When it comes to conflict, there's this thing called the conflict continuum I like to use. I made up this simple construct. The conflict continuum is this. At one end is artificial harmony. This is where people on a team never engage in conflict. They're always nice to one another, even though they don't really feel like it, but that's what they do. At the other end is what I call really awful, ugly, mean-spirited conflict. People are at each other's throats. Okay, so if this is the continuum, if you move down the continuum, you go to a little more constructive conflict, a little more constructive conflict, a little more, a little more, a little more, and at some point it goes from constructive to destructive, and then a little more destructive, a little more, until hell comes, right? And so most teams I work with live out here, close to artificial harmony. Like, oh, we don't want to have that. And it's because they think every time they move in this direction, it's one step closer to hell. Where in fact, the best place to be for a team is right here, where you're having all the constructive conflict possible and not stepping over the line. But we have to have the courage to go there. Well, why don't we want to go there? Because we're just afraid it's going to step over the line. And you know something? It is. The greatest teams in the world occasionally are going to step over the line. And when they do that, it's a moment of truth. It's an opportunity for them to recover from it, be vulnerable around it, and realize that they can survive that. And it gives them the courage to live right here. Teams that don't think that they can overcome that will stay way over here and never benefit from all of this wonderful constructive conflict. So we have to have the courage to go right up to that line and know that when we do step over it, we can recover. And when you recover from that, you build stronger teams. We know this in all of our personal relationships. When you recover from something like that, it only makes your team and your relationship stronger.
That's really the key point, is recovering. It's how you recover. It doesn't matter if you go through conflict situations and you have disagreements in the office, it's how you bounce back and how you grow from that and how you move forward. That's really the key factor. So the next part of this is achieving commitment. And how do you achieve commitment? Like trust, conflict is important because it enables the team to work on the next behavior, which is achieving commitment. When team members are unwilling to weigh in and share their opinions, there's a likelihood that they're not going to commit to whatever decision that is made. And that's really a key point. And I've been to many team meetings where I call them bench sitters, where there will be bench sitters that are sitting there and they are unwilling to contribute, to be part of the actual meeting, but they complain vehemently after the meeting's over that, well, I don't like this, I don't like that, and I wasn't part of this decision, so I'm not going to support it. So it's very important that that everybody is willing to engage in constructive conflict, and that they trust one another, and that they are engaged in the process. Otherwise, it's very hard. You won't gain commitment from them. When team members are able to offer their opinions and debate on the ideas, they're more likely to commit to the decisions that were made. And making a decision doesn't always mean that you're going to reach consensus either. And that's an important thing to remember. It's not necessary to achieve consensus, but clarity and buy-in are the keys to commitment. So now we'll talk about the definition.
So why is conflict so important, though? Why is conflict so important? By the way, I'll have some leaders tell me, listen, Pat, I don't really care if people get their feelings hurt. What I don't want is to waste time. See, they'll say, it just takes too much time. Why should we debate this decision for the next 2 hours? After all, I've been in charge for a long time. I know what we should do. Why don't I just make the decision without engaging in conflict? And I'll save them 2 hours. I'll be their hero. They can go do email or something else. Well, the reason why that's a problem is because it takes us to the next thing that we have to overcome to make our teams great. We have to go from conflict to commitment. You see, the next thing we have to embrace is we have to get our teams to commit to decisions without reservation. And the only way to do that is with conflict. You see, if I make a decision for my team and they haven't weighed in on that decision, they're not going to buy into that decision. Let me repeat that. If people don't weigh in on a decision, they're not going to buy in. Now, that is not an argument for consensus, because I don't believe in consensus. I think that's a four-letter word. If we wait for consensus, if we wait until people all agree on a decision, we're going to make decisions that are too slow, too late, and probably equally dissatisfying for everyone. What I believe we have to do is have conflict so that people, when they weigh in, even if their idea didn't get adopted, they will buy in. I once worked with the leadership team of a company, and something very interesting and painful happened there. They were in a difficult time in their business, and so they realized that their revenue was going down, but they were still hiring a lot of people. And they got together as a leadership team, and they said, we have to do a hiring freeze. And this was a team that didn't engage in conflict very much, and so they said, so there's a hiring freeze starting tomorrow. All our open recs are closed, and no more new hires. So everybody nodded their head and said, yeah. So they left. The head of HR went out, and within 2 hours of the meeting, she sent out a note to everyone in the organization saying, starting tomorrow, there's a hiring freeze. Everybody has to put everything on hold. 2 of the executives were in her office within 10 minutes of that note going out saying, it didn't apply to sales, did it? Another person's like, you didn't mean engineering. And suddenly they were all having to go back and try to correct it in the organization, and they felt like fools. The point of the matter is, in their meeting, when they made this decision, nobody bothered to argue and say, I don't think I should have to live with that. They decided, oh, let's just get out of this meeting. And then the rest of the organization looked at this team and said, they can't even have a discussion and arrive at a commitment and send out an email to the whole organization without making themselves look dysfunctional. That's why it's so important that we arrive at commitments, and the only way to do that is if we engage in conflict.
So a team that fails to commit will create ambiguity among team members about directions and priorities. Obviously, from Patrick's example, he can clearly describe that. They watch windows of opportunity close due to unnecessary delay. They breed lack of confidence and fear of failure. They revisit or rehash discussions again and again, and I've seen this happen over and over again at many staff meetings. They encourage second guessing amongst team members as well. So good leaders will drive commitment of their employees. by extracting every possible idea and perspective. So getting everyone's engagement, everyone's involvement, and everyone's opinion of what they think. Then, comfortable that nothing's been left off the table, they have the courage to step up and make the decision. And that's a key thing. The decision that's made is sure to run counter, sure that there's always going to be at least minimum one person who will disagree with the decision that's made. But a decision has to be made in order to move forward. So that's the important thing. And it's also the ability to defy consensus. So you will never get, whether you have 5 team members on your team or you have 50 team members, you will never get 100% agreement or 100% consensus. So it's very important that the leader has to eventually make the decision, but make the decision based on everyone's opinion. So you have listened to everyone, you've heard everyone, you have discussed it as a group, you have engaged in constructive conflict, and made the best decision possible moving forward. And just 2 more to go. So the next one is bracing accountability. I'm asked this a lot by employers, by dentists, who will ask me, how do I get my team members to become accountable for their actions? So we're going to talk about accountability. So members of effective teams hold each other accountable, or one another for accountable, and they don't rely necessarily on the leader to do everything. When everyone is committed to a clear plan of action, they're better to hold one another accountable. And it's very important that they understand that plan of action. And I'm going to add to this as well, that that plan of action should always be time bound, because if you have a time bound plan of action, it gets done. I will tell you, I was in one office where the doctor had team meetings every 2 weeks. So the staff, when I came in as a consultant, asked me to, will you please speak to the doctor and tell him we don't want team meetings every 2 weeks, because it took clearly 2 hours out of production. So I was thinking, well, 2 hours of productive time would be better as well. And the doctor, when I asked him about it, he said, I am not negotiable on this because of the fact that I set goals. We set goals at each team meeting, and those goals need to be completed. And only 3. There's only 3 things that need to be done. And sometimes they're minor things, sometimes they could be major things, but they need to achieve those 3 goals. And our meetings were on Thursdays, and I found that the ladies in that office on Wednesdays were scrambling to get those goals completed, but they always completed them. And then the doctor, instead of having a bonus system in place, I'm not a great believer in bonus systems, which is another seminar we might talk about it another time, but he would surprise them with something. He would surprise them with bringing sushi lunch for everyone or something, or buy everyone a new uniform. There would be some level of surprise that, and they never knew what it was. They never knew what to expect, but they always accomplished their goals. And so he wanted to have a time-bound action plan. That's really the whole point, to make them accountable for the results, and it worked beautifully on that particular team. Team members also must be willing to call one another out on their behavior or performance that isn't up to agreed upon standards that will hurt the team ultimately. So especially if you have an office where you have team bonuses, for example, then if one person's not pulling their weight, then that will drag everyone down. So that's why accountability is so important. And once again, I will let Patrick.
And accountability is the hardest one for teams to embrace. In working with teams over the years, we found that this is by far the most difficult part of forming a team, is getting people on a team to hold one another accountable for what they've agreed to. Now, notice what I said there, to hold one another accountable. I didn't say for the leader to hold people accountable. You see, the leader is not the primary source of accountability on a team. The leader is the ultimate source, but the primary, the most frequent source of accountability on a team needs to be teammates, peers. Peer pressure on a team is the best thing we've got going. That's where accountability lives. Somebody turning to one of their teammates and saying, hey, we committed to that. I thought you were going to do that. It doesn't look like you're living up to that. That's a beautiful thing. And you see, whether it's military or fire department or doctors in the emergency room, people don't go to their boss and tell on somebody. They confront one another directly because they know that's the way to get things done. And the very best teams very, very infrequently have to go to the leader and tell them about something. That just drags us into politics and delay. great teams turn to one another and say, hey, listen, we trust each other, we've engaged in conflict, we committed to that, it would only make sense that I would confront you directly and say, what's going on? That is the most beautiful thing you can see on a team, is people holding each other accountable. Now, what's ironic about this is the only way to create peer-to-peer accountability is if the leader demonstrates that he or she is willing to hold people accountable. See, it's ironic. The more that a leader is willing to do it, the less likely that he or she is going to have to. But if a leader doesn't like to do it, and that's me, I do not like to do this, I'm not good at this, this is my big issue as a leader. If the leader does not like to hold the team members accountable, then people are going to go to them and make them do it. Because they're going to think, why should I do your dirty work if you're going to let them off the hook? Accountability is one of those interesting things that it's so hard for me to do it, but I know it really works and how important it is. And I recently was reminded of that when I was working on a project team with a guy, and he's become a friend of mine, and there's a number of us on this team, but he's new to this particular project. And so he's not been on board for very long, and we noticed he wasn't working with a sense of urgency and really driving the project forward, even though he's now in charge of it. So me and another colleague decided to have a meeting with him, and we sat him down in this conference room, and we just said, here's some of the things we noticed that you're doing that probably you need to do better. And we need you to push harder on this and to take ownership of this and be more detail-oriented and not be so passive about it. And it wasn't easy to tell him this. He's older than me, and he's a friend of mine. And 2 weeks later, his performance went through the roof. People were like, what is that guy doing? This is amazing. I mean, it just completely transformed his performance. And he came to us later and said, I'll tell you what, it was painful to hear what you said to me in that one meeting, but it gave me the clarity I needed to improve. I'm totally doing different work. And I'm so appreciative of the fact that somebody told me that, because in every other job I've had, nobody would say anything to me. They would just talk about it without me being there, and I'd find out about it 6 months later. And I realized that when I withhold feedback from somebody and I don't hold them accountable to the behaviors and the performance they have, I'm not giving them a chance to improve. And when that person really wants to do a good job, that's the worst disservice I could do for them. So I think for those of you, if you're like me, that don't like to hold people accountable, remember that you're doing them a favor. And it's really an act of love. And I think that's something that can really help any team, is to embrace that kind of accountability.
I'd just like to add to that too, and that's certainly how that doctor that I was telling you about got his team to be accountable, because those ladies would, as I said, scramble on Wednesdays to make sure that they reached all their goals. But the other thing that I observed in that is that they helped each other. They went to each other and said, we have to have this done by tomorrow. How can I help you? what do you need from me? And that helps to also build the trust with one another and camaraderie. And it's just a really nice way of working together. And that was one of the best offices that I worked with. They were just an amazing team and very successful as well. So team members who do not hold one another accountable create resentment among team members who have different standards of performance. So everyone needs to pull their own weight and feel that everybody is pulling their own weight. It encourages mediocrity. They miss deadlines and key deliverables as well. Place undue burden on the team leaders as the sole source of discipline. So it's important to make accountability part of your team culture. The team leader must model that behavior, of course, and be willing to remind individual team members of their responsibilities in terms of behavior and the results that are expected. And role clarity is very important in what the expectations of the doctor and the team and the team leaders. And I find that with a lot of employees is that they don't understand what's expected of them. So role clarity is a key thing as well. Accountability starts with the leader. Although the leader should not be the primary source of accountability, as Patrick said, he or she should be the ultimate source. And finally, the last behavior on that 5 behaviors of cohesive team is focusing on results. So the ultimate goal of building greater trust and engaging in healthy conflict, achieving commitment and accountability is the achievement of results. That's really what you want to achieve after all of this. So team members Sorry, there's something going on my computer. I hope it's not affecting me there. So we'll just move on to the definition of results.
Why is it so important that we hold people accountable? It seems obvious, but there's actually a very practical reason, because when we hold people accountable, we enable ourselves to embrace the fifth and final behavior at the heart of building a great team, and that is the attention to results. If we hold people accountable, then we will do our very best to make sure that the organization, the team, is focused on the collective results of the team rather than their own individual results. See, that's the thing. People say, well, what would they pay attention to other than results? Well, they'll pay attention to their own results, their department, their career, their budget, their status. This happens all the time on teams. People say, I'm results focused for myself, not for the collective good of the team. The only way to make sure that it's the collective team results that matter most is if people know they're going to be held accountable for doing anything that runs counter to the good of the whole team. That's how accountability enables results. And just in case we don't think that there are people on our teams that would ever put their own individual needs ahead of the team's needs, I want you to think about an example from the world of sports. Okay, there was a basketball player that played with Michael Jordan. You probably remember him. His name was Scottie Pippen. He was a great basketball player, probably not only the second best player on the Bulls back when Jordan played, but the second best player in the NBA. So Jordan retired for this first time. He retired a few times. And Pippen became the best player on the Chicago Bulls. Well, even without Jordan, the Bulls were favored to win their division, go deep into the playoffs, maybe even make it to the championship series, and who knows? Even without Michael Jordan, maybe they could win the whole thing. So they make the playoffs, no big surprise. They're playing the New York Knicks, their hated rival in the playoffs, right? So it's a tie game, national television, 20,000 people in the arena. And it's a tie game, and the ball goes out of bounds off one of the Knicks. So it's Chicago Bulls basketball. They call timeout. So with like 1.8 seconds to go in the game, timeout, Phil Jackson, the famous coach of the Bulls, calls the team over to the sidelines, and he diagrams a play for them to take the last shot to win the game. So he has the play diagrammed, and instead of the ball going to Pippen, who's their best player, he's going to have it go to Tony Kukoc, who's a really good outside shooter who will probably be open because they'll be covering Pippen. And so he diagrams a play, and Pippen looks at it and says, no, I should get the ball. I'm the best player on the team. And Jackson says, no, see, here's how we're going to do it. He's going to be open, and we're going to get it to him so he'll have a good shot. And Pippen says, no, I should get the ball. And Jackson says, no, see, he's going to get the ball. And Pippen says, well, if I don't get the ball, then I'm not going to play. If I don't get the ball, I'm not going to play. And they were like, okay, you're in for Pippen. Pippen sat on the bench. Everybody went out on the court. The fans were like, why is our best player not out there? The announcers were like, did he get hurt? Did he foul out? What's going on? Nobody knew that he just opted out of the game because he wanted to be the guy. Well, they made the shot, won the game, irrelevant. The moral of this story is this. I wish every organization out there, I wish everyone here, the organizations you work in, I wish you all had people with the courage and audacity of Scottie Pippen who could stand up in front of everyone else and say, you guys don't understand. It's not about the team. It's about me. Because see, then you'd know who to fire. I mean, wouldn't it be great if people just told us that?
Isn't that true? So when a team fails to focus on results, it rarely defeats its competitors. It loses achievement-oriented employees, and that happens quite often when somebody is really helpful and wants to achieve something great in the team, and they become discouraged and move on to greener pastures. They becomes easily distracted, it stagnates and fails to grow. So great teams will set aside their individual needs and focus on what's best for the entire team. Emphasize the collective results that define the team's success. So truly cohesive teams will focus on the collective results of the organization. They also are intolerant of actions and behaviors that don't promote the common good. They are also willing to make sacrifices to drive the collective results of the team and keep the results in the forefront of people's minds. So in summary, the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team are trust one another, engage in conflict around ideas, commit to decisions, hold one another accountable, and focus on achieving results. And thank you so much for your time. And at this point, I think we can open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandy. What a fantastic webinar this was.
Oh, good.
I have one question here right now. It says, how hopeful could I be to change a team member that brings negativity to the team?
Well, very hopeful. Try the personal histories exercise. As there are a couple of different things. I would try that as a team, a complete team. But also, you may also want to have a performance review with that person too, and talk about their personal behavior, because it's very important. That's exactly what happened at the office that I was working at, where we had I called her the receptionist from hell, pardon the French, but she brought a lot of negativity to the team, but that wasn't apparent in the beginning when she was first hired. She was Susie Sunshine in the beginning. So it was, but she had to be called out on her behavior. And, but I would try the personal histories exercise. If she's not willing to engage in that and come out, there could be something, a reason that she is negative. It could be something, you know, in her home life or whatever. You don't want to get too deeply involved or personal, but you can certainly set the standards for the behavior in the workplace. That's really important. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Joanne, you're muted right now.
Sorry. Question of whether you're going to receive the recorded meeting so they can share it with their team members, which is a great idea. That would be a really good thing to do over a staff meeting. And yes, you will be receiving it in a few days. We will send it out to you for sure.
Next question, Sandy, is what happens when the leader is bringing the negativity, destroys morale, and he is the only one to solve any problem in the office?
Well, that's a great question. As we mentioned in the webinar, you know, the leader is the person who has to model the behavior. So if the leader is that person, I don't know how comfortable you would be in talking to that person, and I'm assuming that it might be your boss. I'm not 100% sure, but I know it's an uncomfortable conversation to have with them. But maybe you could share some of the information that you learned tonight, and just you know, commit to trying to bring positive light to the office as well. I always do a lot of this type of work during team meetings. So I don't know if you have regular team meetings, but if you do, maybe change up the format of your meeting to get everybody engaged. And the person who is exhibiting that negative behavior sometimes will catch on, and they'll get engaged and be more interested in the overall success of the practice. So it's a tough one. I know it's tough, especially when that person is in charge. You know, they really have to model the behavior that they want to achieve in the office.
How do you handle conflict between two employees? Do you recommend mediating or let them pound it out themselves? Or do you speak to them separately?
It depends on the seriousness of the conflict, because I've had experiences where if left to their own devices, sometimes it can escalate to something really not comfortable and nasty. So it's very important that you address it with both of them. I would sit down with both of them and just try to find out what the nature of the conflict, where it's coming from. You might want to sit with them together, and that would let them both have their voice, and to try to determine what the best solution might be. And if that doesn't work, then each of them individually. And also let them know that if you're doing regular performance reviews, you know, it's really important that people understand that they need to be able to resolve their conflicts. I had an experience years ago where there was two staff members who really didn't like each other, and they were constantly at each other's throat, more or less. And so I took them to lunch. And basically I said, you know, you don't necessarily have to be best friends, but you have to behave in a certain manner in the office. So let's get to the bottom of this. And, you know, once they talked it out and realized they were making a mountain out of a molehill, and that's often what happens in offices, is if little issues go unspoken and they are not resolved, then it turns into a larger issue, and then resentments build up. And so if you get those resentments out, you get, sorry, not the resentment, but the issues out in the open, and you are able to trust each other and talk to each other in a trusting environment, then it usually resolves itself. In that particular case, those two ended up being like really almost best friends, maybe not quite best friends, but they ended up being very, very good friends in the end. And it was just over a simple misunderstanding.
Great. How do you deal with team members where all members are S's as a team leader coming into this team?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I'm glad you brought that up, because when we were going through the DISC profiling, I was thinking, but I knew we had limited time because I had so much information here. But it's not good to have just one dominant style on your team. Say, for example, with all the S's, you would have a lot of people who want to collaborate, don't want to make waves, and they want to make everybody happy. And so, you know, then they would get nothing done or get very little done. Where you kind of need the D's for the drivers, you know, but you don't want all D's either, because they would butt heads all the time. And so that would cause all kinds of destructive conflict in your office. It would go from constructive to destructive very quickly. So you don't, and the I's won't necessarily get a lot of things done. However, everybody will feel great, you know, during the day. And the C's will be overly conscientious, but it will frustrate them like heck if they don't get things accomplished. So it's really important that you have a nice mix of all kinds of different personality styles in your office. And but when you have all the S's, remember, like to collaborate. They do like to get things done. They make decisions, but they have to make sure that they have all the information first. So so if you have all S's, then it would be important to share as much information as you can, get them to engage in the discussions, make sure that you get all of their opinions, and then hopefully you've got a D there so you can get a decision made.
Great. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions left for this evening. So again, thank you very much, Sandy, for putting on this wonderful webinar tonight. Thank you to Joanne and Jessica for all the help behind the scenes. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you next month.
Great. Thanks so much. Take care.
Right.
Bye. Thank you.